Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
In this episode of the Massive Change Show, we're joined by Ryan Honeyman. Ryan is a partner and owner at Lift Economy and is an expert in B Corp certifications. Ryan is the co-author of the B Corp Handbook and has assisted over 80 companies in achieving B Corp certification. Enjoy the show. So Ryan, you have the advantage, or like the special badge of having the coolest last name, I think, so far of people that we've interviewed or had conversations with. So welcome to the Massive Change Show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And so tell us a little bit about your background, how you got here, and, you know, stuff that maybe you can't necessarily find on LinkedIn or tell us something juicy about you.
Yeah. Let's see. How I came to this space. So I originally studied psychology and criminal justice. So I was not into sort of impact or sustainability or any of this early on. And my goal was to reform the prison system. That's kind of what I thought I wanted to do. So I actually worked as a residential counselor, as a group home, at a group home for emotionally troubled kids. And I got punched and spit on and kicked and yelled at. But for me, I was actually happy because I felt like, I'm being authentic. Like I'm not just in an ivory tower, like talking about prison reform. But as you might imagine, that kind of burned me out after a few years. And so I switched over. My brother had studied environmental studies, and I read some of his books early on and kind of changed my career path to go away from prison reform and criminal justice onto sustainability and social impact and how to use business as a force for good.
Very good. And when you, how long have you been doing your own thing then?
So in 2010 is when I read these books and sort of made the shift. The story is I had read a few books that my brother had given me, and I wrote an email at like 9 p.m. to the executive director of this nonprofit that I was working with. And I said, hey, I think we could be a green nonprofit, thinking about sustainability, blah, blah, blah. And I got a phone call from the executive director of this large nonprofit like 15 minutes later, like 9:15 at night. I was like, what the hell is my phone ringing for? And he's like, hey, I got your email. That sounds great. You want to be our sustainability lead? And I was like, yes, I guess. And so, it just goes to show, I think if people like put themselves out there and sort of like ask for something, it's, you just give yourself a chance. And so that sort of led me into, by 2011, I had started my own solo consulting firm and started doing this work. So
beautiful. Thank you.
So I'm going to start asking the questions. The first question that we ask to all system shakers, that is, what is one idea that you have that will probably piss off a lot of powerful people?
Yeah, I love this question, and I love that you've shaped your show around it. So I think the idea that I wanted to bring to the listeners is this idea of something called the most generous interpretation of an idea or a concept. So how this would piss off powerful people is because most people, including powerful people, don't usually want to hear the most generous interpretation of why someone does something. They usually want to take the least generous interpretation, was like, this guy's an a-hole, or like they're selfish, or, that's where we immediately want to go. So the most generous interpretation is you're not necessarily agreeing with the behavior or the action, but you're trying to understand from a most generous interpretation of why they did something. So I'll take it to an example. So for those of you involved in the social impact space or the B Corp world in particular, Dr. Bronner's recently decertified as a B Corp. They had a big splashy press release saying that we're really dissatisfied with B Corp. The standards have been diluted because B Lab has let in multinationals, particularly Nespresso and Unilever, Australia, and New Zealand. And so Dr. Bronner's put out a press release that seemed to, and had some of the effect of, really kind of burning some of the larger B Corp movement. It seemed like they had been sort of, it almost seemed, from a least generous interpretation, like, you're throwing us under the bus, you're burning bridges, you're only worried about yourself, you're just trying to distance yourself from everyone else. So those are all the least generous interpretation things that came up. But I tried to take the way we have a podcast as well called Beyond the B, where we talk about the latest on the B Corp movement. And I tried to approach what they did from most generous interpretation framework. And so what I tried to do was to say, why would Dr. Bronner's put this out, and how can I connect with those reasons rather than immediately going to the reaction? So I imagined they probably had, anger, frustration, impatience, helplessness, and sadness about the state of the world. So some of those emotions. There's some structural differences, with supply chain focused companies like Dr. Bronner's, where they really face a lot of different issues than service based companies that a lot of us in the social impact and B Corp world face. In the product world and supply chain world, B Corps have experienced dilution of the standards from like organic, fair trade, because multinationals would come in and like take over the organic standards and dilute it. I also imagine that Dr. Bronner's had some, skepticism about whether they could actually, B Corp certification could change multinationals. They also had experience with B Lab, where B Lab is the nonprofit behind the B Corp movement, where they felt some frustrations about transparency and responsiveness of B Lab. And the last thing I realized that Dr. Bronner's is an activist brand. They're provocative, they're direct, and they're committed to holding power accountable. So what I did in my podcast episode was to say, these are all the ways that I'm viewing what Dr. Bronner's did. And I don't necessarily agree how they did it, but I think if we're talking about effective systemic change, I think connecting with people on that most generous interpretation level really helps you understand what's likely the reason they're doing something, and not just go to the most evil, terrible thing that they're doing. And so I think that's what I would want to see more folks, listeners of this podcast and others in the social impact space, really saying, how do we look at something that we disagree with? And not necessarily, again, we're not approving or condoning what happened, but try to understand it and be most effective in addressing it.
And why, Ryan, why do you think that idea, which I love, and I think there's an old school word for it called grace, that we don't really use anymore. But why would extending grace to someone, especially within the social impact space, why would that be considered offensive to powerful people? Why would that bother them? Why would they give a shit if you did that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few reasons. Like, one, if you're a powerful person, I mean, I know that you've written extensively on our current administration and have lots of thoughts on that topic, but
I got no grace for them.
I know, fair enough. And I would say that, for them to view, so it's more like for them viewing social impact leaders, like why we might think about sustainable business or doing things differently, they might say, well, it's because they're, Marxist communists or blah, blah, blah. But so It's like, we're wanting that most generous interpretation from them of like, see us.
Yes. Right.
But I think it's the same, for Dr. Bronner's, and why that might piss off powerful people is, if I'm like the B Lab leadership or folks in the social impact space who disagree, and those are powerful people, and they disagree with what Dr. Bronner's did, to immediately go to like, oh, well, they're just they're just full of themselves and like very self-centered. You just immediately lose the helpfulness or like, what is the truth underneath that action that can then allow you to then make the change. So it pisses people off because it's honestly harder. Like, I think it's harder to give people grace than it is to actually, it feels better. It's like, well, fuck them, or I don't know if we can cuss on this podcast.
You can say that, cuss as much as you want.
I think it feels better, and it's more, it gets it off our chest, but it's not actually as effective at like bringing about the change that we want.
Yeah, it's interesting because self-righteousness is across all spectrums, like in that sense of, I sometimes jokingly say, and I'll save this for more of the second show, but the concept of a purity culture, which is a religious right thing, there's definitely a purity culture in what would be considered more of the left or progressive view of things, and it's less threatening and less gross, but still not all that attractive as a trait, especially when it is. The more powerful someone is that's self-righteous, the more sanctimonious they become. And it's like a triangulation of power and self-righteousness makes a baby called sanctimonious. Yep. And it's a conversation stopper too. And I love how you did this inquiry, like, oh, why would they do that? I think that's just a general useful skill where everything is presented to us into the world very often as good, bad, with very little, on a very short spectrum.
Yep. And also, if may I add, when we think of reality, the world that we live, that is complex, it's a complex system. Nothing really, like in nature, nothing is black or white. This dichotomous way of thinking is just made up by humans to simplify our life. But at the end, we detach from reality in many ways. Because in reality, two opposite things can be true at the same time. They're both true. It's not that one is right and the other is wrong. They're both true. They're different way of seeing the same thing. So having the humility to take feedback that way and say, like, any feedback, even if you disagree at the beginning, if you don't see it at the beginning, having the capacity and the humbleness to say, how is this true? At what level, in what form this feedback can be true? Because if you don't do that, you're really closing the doors for evolution, for your own evolution and for your organization evolution and for everybody's evolution. Because it's saying, like, what I thought is right is a thing, is like a fact, and therefore we never have to question it ever again. When things change, I mean, even if you were, let's say, right back then, things change, and you have to keep changing with the world at the same time and with the system. So yeah, it's somehow is self-harming, being so close to other perspective and feedback in any way.
Yeah. Right. I should just say that I want to give credit. So this most generous interpretation framework came from a parenting book, actually, called Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. I know two of your parents, and so you may resonate with this. But like, her theory was, it's not you're a good kid or a bad kid. You're always a good kid, and then the behavior is something that we may have issue with. But fundamentally, you're a good kid. And like that, and that being sort of because if you don't believe that someone is a good kid or like good inside, it's hard to have a most generous it's hard to have the empathy to then have a most generous interpretation of their behavior. And so, an example might be a kid is like, I want ice cream for dinner. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, this kid is disrespectful. They don't respect me and the way that I cooked this dinner. So it's like, again, like taking it about me, but the most generous interpretation might be, it's hard for day after day not to be in charge of what food goes in your body, right. So it's sort of trying to expand a little bit. So you're not excusing the behavior, but you're simply allowing us to ground and intervene in a more effective way, I think, in parenting and also in social impact work.
Yeah. So where is the line then? So I would interpret this, and you tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but essentially there's grace, there's this most generous interpretation, but there probably has to be a line where, somebody did an analysis of like totalitarianism and authoritarianism during, the middle 1900s and early, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and all that. And it was the sort of this place where tolerance became intolerance, meaning it allowed intolerance to thrive because nobody said anything. So in general, you can answer that, but also more related to the work within social impact of the B Corp community. For you, for Ryan, where would there be a line where you'd be like, okay, I am not giving you any more interpretation here. I see, I'm not even looking, I'm now questioning your character. So
absolutely,
where is that?
It's a great question. And I want to be clear that I do not actually live up to this most of the time.
We gave you the most generous interpretation, Ryan, that you do. So
I get mad at my kids. I snap at them. I think there's people in social impact work that are I still fall trap to it. It's just my aspiration. So this is like one narrow tool, and maybe a broader tool that I will mention for folks is nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. If either you've heard of that.
Yes.
It's basically like connecting to the core human needs that we all share. So if someone says, I don't want, I want ice cream for dinner, and it's a grown-up or something, you might be like, what is the core human need here? Well, it's probably they want to be understood and to have connection and understand. So it takes work, right? All this stuff is hard to do, but I think it gets a little easier if we have it and practice it, and like gives us a little bit more space to like practice these things. So to your question of where's the line, it's probably not a popular opinion, but I do feel like when, take whatever unsavory character of like, I won't say his name, but a prominent politician right now, when did that person become like bad or evil? Like, were they good up until like high school, or were they good until whatever? And so for me, it's like, it feels like we have to have the belief deep down that people are at their core good, but are very like either very confused or like have a lot of like built on trauma and, societal pressures on top of that make their behavior reprehensible. But at their very root, I do feel like it's very radical to say that I do think everyone is actually good inside, and that they just the behavior, but that's a lot different than saying I will accept your behavior and like how you manifest that in the world.
Mm-hmm. I think I can provide another example. The fact that I think generosity, what you're suggesting, having the most generous interpretation, is something we should do for ourselves.
Yes.
Not just for the other person. It's like, because that keeps us humble, that keeps us open, our mind open, our heart open, and, in constant reflection and developing that capacity for empathy and for understanding and for embracing the complexity really of the world and humans. And that doesn't mean at any point that you have to accept or approve or tolerate any behavior. For instance, if we get in a discussion, I can say, I want to understand why you're saying this, or why you're thinking this way, or why you are behaving this way. I want to understand. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to set boundaries to protect myself. I'm going to set boundary. I'm going to set a limit. If it's my son, I'm going to say, I really want to understand. And I know deep down, you're a good kid, and you have in your head amazing reasons for doing this. In your head, you're right, because we don't do things wrong, most of us. You have to be a sociopath and a psychopath. But most of us don't do things wrong or harmful because we want to. Is in general, we think that we're defending ourselves, that this is for a better cause, this is for, this is the right thing. Whatever justification we're convinced in our head that we're right. So I can say, I want to understand why you want ice cream, or why you resist so much on, cleaning your room or doing homework, whatever, because I know that he has good reasons for him. That doesn't mean that he's not going to face the consequences of his behavior.
Mhm.
But what I'm acting on is the behavior, the specific behavior, because we are in society and we are in community, and everything we do or we don't do affects everybody else and everything else, and is affected by everything else as well. But saying I can be as open-minded and really generous with my interpretation and really trying to understand and limitless, because I'm doing it for myself.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that I don't set boundaries and I don't impose consequences on certain behaviors. Two separate
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. I just want to say that you touched on something that I had not really thought of, but is actually probably the most important point, which is, can we first start with ourselves with the most generous interpretation? Because I don't know about two of you, but I will immediately start on the least generous interpretation of like, oh, I'm not working hard enough. I'm such a lazy a-hole, like, and I'm like, well, why am I actually like, what's the most generous like give what? And I'm like, oh, well, my wife was out of town for 2 weeks and I watched the kids. I was solo parenting. And so I'm just like really tired. And that's a generous interpretation. And I'm like, okay, that feels
Yeah.
different than just like such a lazy asshole is not productive.
Right.
So
yeah, it's a skill. Yeah. So you have no reason not to develop the skill, because you have you as a subject to practice on all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the space that you're in, Ryan, and social impact and being in the consulting space in general, what kind of challenges do you run into when you present this idea to other people?
Yeah.
I'm really, really curious about this one, because there's a lot of like righteous fervor in the space. So
yeah. Well, in the Dr. Bronner situation, I think that it is so appealing when someone puts out a press release saying, the B Corp community is like, no longer credible, et cetera. You feel attacked and you're like, well, you know what, like, fuck these people. Like, who do they think they are? And so if I'm coming in like, hey, let's take a most generous interpretation, people are like, no, look what they did. Like, why would you do that? So I think the pushback is, I don't, and I want to be respectful and mindful of like people's capacity for that sort of analysis, and not, and not everyone is like, oh, I have all this spaciousness to consider all these things that happen and like, what's the most generous interpretation of them? But I will say that the pushback is often like, what they did was wrong, and I actually don't want to take the mental space to actually give them, because it's almost like a feeling of, if I'm allowing myself to open up to like emotion or interpretation, it's actually scary, because it sort of touches the boundaries of like what I believe about myself and like my own identity and like how I see the world. And that's actually really scary for people, because you start to be like, well, it's much safer when things are black and white, even for liberal, folks on the left as well. And so if you're looking at something like a situation in social impact or politics or whatever, it starts to be like, well, if I'm offering empathy, they didn't do that for me. Or if I'm offering empathy, then does that mean I have to approve of their behavior? So I think it just brings up a lot of questions about like, what does it mean to open up? And so I think
in that case too, it probably, as you said, you didn't use this word, but felt maybe to the community as like a kind of betrayal. But I'm curious about this idea of most generous interpretation when it goes to somebody that maybe is more conservative in their political views. Now, I delineate conservative from MAGA, because those are MAGA. That is not a conservative movement. It's something different podcast episode, but it's not conservative. So somebody's more conservative, and how do you run into that, where there's just sort of like prejudging someone if they don't check all the boxes from an ideological standpoint?
Yeah, I think so. One story I'll give you on this is my uncle. I don't know if everyone has an uncle who's conservative. I certainly do. I have
Yes.
I have a conservative uncle
Yeah.
who's very, very right wing, very Trump
Uh-huh.
supporting. And what I didn't actually necessarily use this framework, but the way I went into it, I wanted to have conversations with him and just like, I actually wanted to genuinely learn,
Right.
like, why do you support this person, or why do you support these policies? And I was, so some interesting things came up. So two examples. So one was, we were talking about money in politics, and I was like, what do you think about the whole thing about unlimited political donations from corporations? He's like, I think that's terrible. I think we should get rid of that Supreme Court decision. I was like, wait a minute, you want to get rid of
Yeah.
like
Citizens United. Yeah.
yeah, Citizens United? And he's like, yeah, I think that's terrible. And I was like, okay, there's one thing we agree on. And then another thing was, I was like, so in your mind, is it just open carry? Everyone has guns everywhere, and like, what is your belief? And he's like, yeah, I think that would be great. But I said, well, what about like folks with criminal records or mental health? He's like, oh no, we should have screening for guns. We should not just have guns everywhere. And I was like, okay, well, that's another thing we agree with. And so I thought you would have just been very, like like guns, like a vending machine with guns or something. But so I think that it's threatening for people, because you're like, well, wait a minute, I have agreements. So this person that I created a character of that is wrong and I'm right is actually starting to break down a little bit, and it's scary to actually to go into that.
Yes, I see. Like Gavin Newsom's new podcast where he had Charlie Kirk.
I really like his podcast, by the way.
Me too. And I mean, I think he's kind of smarmy a bit, but he, hey, he's at least willing to have conversations and willing to go talk to and debate other people. And he's not an ideological purist. And I don't think you can be at most generous and give most generous interpretation and be an ideological purist at the same time, honestly. And so that's a great example of a story of, of how to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah. I think coming in with, there's another person I'll mention. Maybe it's a future season of your podcast, but this woman, Jenny Morgan, who wrote a book called Cancel Culture and Climate. And I really liked her book because she took all the stuff that cancel culture had done over many years and said, we're actually doing that in the climate space too, where let's say a corporation like Nespresso, maybe several years ago, they did have a human rights situation in their supply chain, but then therefore for the rest of eternity, they can no longer be a company that can do anything good. It's like they're canceled. And so it was a really interesting conversation for me, because you have to, if you come into a conversation with the belief like, well, I'm right and this person's wrong, and I'm just going to convince them of my opinion, and you're not actually willing to like, one of the questions she asked is like, what information or data could the other person present to you that would change your mind? And if there's no information or data that they could present to you that would change your mind, then that's a problem, because it means you're holding on to like positions that are sort of more rooted in like emotions, or like it's not actually something you're willing to change your mind on either.
Yeah, Monica Guzman, do you know her work at all by chance? So I'll put it in the show notes, but she has a book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And I had her on my Third Way podcast a couple of years ago. And it's essentially the same type of thing of, extending enough grace to have a conversation. And what I have found, unfortunately, is that grace is not extended the other way very often. Like the volatility of trying to talk to someone that has different views, whether it's whatever extreme you want to look at, grace sometimes has to be a two-way street, or it's just not worth it.
Yes.
So
for collaboration, it's not worth it, but for your own personal growth and evolution, it is, because it trains you to open. It's like traveling. I think that I wish every kid has the opportunity to travel outside their country to a completely different culture, Latin America, Africa, Asia, I mean, you name it, not necessarily Europe, but, to the global south, and go there knowing that they are the outliers, they are the difference, and everybody there is enjoying and respecting and, you know, expressing their culture. The level of humility you develop when you are different, when you are in another culture, in another country, and saying that they're not wrong because they're different from me. And I'm not wrong for being who I am, but I'm here to learn. And that changed, for instance, my reactions to a lot of things that happen in the world are very different than most of Americans,
Mm-hmm.
because I travel, I've been living in different countries, in different continents. So I have more like a systemic perspective of things, and put things, is not about relativism, because I don't believe in that's a good thing, but it's about putting things in perspective and saying like how this how everything is related to something else, and what can I learn from that and how apply that to my own life. And it's a little bit of challenging the ego, and I think that most of this, what we've been talking today, is about the ego needing to make a strong, clear difference between me and everybody else. It's like what makes me different. So the fear of finding something in common when you disagree with a person, or
Yeah.
what it means that if I agree with that person means that I'm diluting my ego, that I'm not myself
Mm-hmm.
anymore, that I'm betraying my values and my, where are my standards. That's pure fear. And it's ego, and it's totally artificial in many ways. So it's about challenge yourself for the sake of becoming a better person, and becoming more smart, and becoming more skilled, and becoming, eventually you're not going to get to agreements or collaboration with everybody, because it's for collaboration is two ways. To develop
Mhm.
the skills, just need one way. But for collaboration is two ways, and we need collaboration. But the more you develop these skills, and I'm saying this as a mindset coach as well, the more you develop these skills, the more capacity you have to find what is the shared result that you both want, and how you get it accomplished, how you accomplish that, how you get it done, because you have the skills of finding the nuances, instead of saying like, I want chocolate ice cream and you want fries, then we cannot go out. Instead of saying like,
Mm-hmm.
how about we go out? I mean, we both want to go out, eat out. You want to eat something, I want to eat something else. How we find a place? How about we find a place where they serve both, for instance? That level of the capacity of finding a way to collaborate and to work together with other people starts with developing that skill.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Love it.
So this has been a very interesting conversation, and I would want to kind of wrap it for you, Ryan, here with giving you the space to talk about maybe something that we didn't ask you. That we have these system shaker questions, but your topic is very fascinating. And so, is there anything that we didn't ask you that you'd like to share?
Well, I do think um, I do want to give a plug again to the nonviolent communication movement and the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, who's passed away. The book came out, I think, the 90s, but it's really looking at the whole way we communicate. So, even taking it beyond just, I think one thing is like, what's the most generous interpretation and how does that help us? It's kind of like a quick hack to like get to the empathy and understanding of someone. If folks are interested in like, how do you like systematically do this in conversations and in your relationships in a more systematic way, that the book Nonviolent Communication is super helpful, and has helped me in my marriage. It's helped me with my kids. It's helped me with my business partners. We argue a lot. So I do think that, you know, learning to have difficult conversations, and, um, you know, one thing that you said, Virginia, that I want to encourage listeners to do is to like dip into that uncomfortable place where you're stretching beyond what's comfortable in terms of like your own identity of like, this is what I believe, these are my people, this is who I am, to like, what is that place where it's a little bit, it like tests your own comfort level, not anything like dangerous or like, you know, you don't have to watch 100 hours of MAGA YouTube, you know, but I do think of just like, what are those things that I think I know that maybe it could be helpful for me to understand from a different perspective. And so reaching out and sort of taking a risk, I think is really key for us, especially in this time when we're on the left, we're sort of having to figure out what just happened and how we can be better.
Yeah, very good. Well, we will put your contact, information, your website and everything. From one, I guess I would ask this from one business owner to another, how would people know that they need you? Like someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, that guy's interesting and he seems really nice. But how would they know they need what you do for a living? Like what your offers are?
Yeah. Well, I mean, check out the Beyond the B podcast where we get into this around the B Corp movement. We actually have another podcast that I'll plug. It's called Next Economy Now, which is about broader, how do we create and build the next economy? And how they would know they would need me is if, I guess, particularly business owners who want to become a certified B Corporation or look into that movement. I help companies certify and recertify as B Corps. And so, yeah, all things B Corp, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Very good. Anything else for Ryan, Virginia, before we go to the second show?
No, I mean, again, you're already invited for another one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the third show. Yeah.
Your commitment public here.
Okay. Yeah. You heard it here first, folks.
Heard it here first. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Ryan. We're going to say goodbye to you and then talk about you behind your back. No,
all right.
I love it. Yeah. Okay, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And just so I know, should I hang up?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if it was like, and now we can stop the recording.
No. Okay. No. We don't stop recording.
Thanks, y'all.
That's okay. All right. Bye.
Talk soon. Bye.
We should leave that in.
Yes. Yeah. That was fun. It's an unusual conversation for this show, but I love it because it's so timely. It's really what we need right now. For many people, it's so everybody's so polarized. Everybody's like out of fear, getting more and more in their corner instead of getting out of it, and that doesn't help. That doesn't help society. If everybody is hiding, or yelling, nobody evolves. Nobody really move on.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Well, I kind of.
It's not just to clarify. I'm not just saying that you should be open and having conversations with someone that is extremely opposite of you, someone that really disagrees with you. I'm talking even with people in your own community. I mean, social movements right now, for instance, are having such a bad time, such a tough time. Everybody's stressed out, everybody's burned out, everybody is like uncertain about the future. That tension creates more friction than necessary with potential allies, with other groups, other communities, but with everybody trying to protect themselves. Totally understandable, of course. But that doesn't open possibilities and the opportunity to create alliances, to say like, okay, we are different groups, we are from different communities, but what do we have in common besides patriarchy, exploitative capitalism, and institutionalized religion and white supremacy? But what do we have in common? How can we join forces in spite of having different interests and agendas?
Yeah. Yes, and I guess I think about Gandhi's quote where he says something like, if there's only a choice between cowardice or violence, I'll choose violence. And so this isn't to negate at all what Ryan said. I think it's a very important skill. And you said something that was so profound. You said, well, it's first for you. to give yourself that, the most generous interpretation. But then you said something else about even if you can't make it worse, you're still exercising the skill in a conversation. I mean, if there's no resolution, you're still exercising it. I'm like, that's a really good point. And I think that we have reached a state of such divided, like there's the upside down, to quote from the Stranger Things, the reality, this strange sort of manufactured reality that people on the extremes live in. And if we were to put an ideological spectrum on it, there's sort of the MAGA group, and then there's people on the very fringy left that kind of live in their own little universe. The difference with the fringy left is they're not dangerous necessarily. They're not hurting people. They're not sending them to El Salvador without due process. And so for me, as a straight white American male, I think I have a little bit different standard here. And I realize it's my own, I have no problem giving most generous interpretation to people that are not those things, about why they behaved a certain way and what their motivation was, and going on down. If it's another swam, I kind of run out of grace, honestly, to a certain extent, to be very honest about it. Is like, if you come from a place of privilege and you still practice willful ignorance, if you still practice choosing to hate people you don't even know, I really struggle with that. It doesn't mean that I doubt their value in the eyes of God or whatever. It's not that. It's more like I don't have the energy for it if it's another swam.
Yeah, but this is the difference. It's not either one thing or the other. It's both and. Because you can say, I think that you're going to, having a conversation and trying to do like a generous interpretation means that I'm condoning that I'm allowing it, that I'm okay with him thinking that way or behaving that way. It's not that. Mm-hmm. That's why boundaries are for. If I might disagree with you or with anybody, but I can see, okay, I disagree. We can have a discussion. We can have a debate about that. And it's normal that I want to hear what his arguments are for many reasons. First, because it might be easier actually to have a conversation with that person and help them see another perspective if I know where he's coming from, than if I don't. And second, because of my own benefit as well, to, practice, stretch my own boundaries. But if his behavior, her behavior actually hurt me or my community, I set a limit. It's not something personal, but it's like, and if I have to defend myself in a violent, if you hit me, I will defend myself. I will hit you back.
But I'll take a different, so I hear you, but I'll take a different scenario, and I would love you to challenge me on this. So 75% of the people that were sent to, I refuse to use the word deported, because deporting is a legal process, it's a legal term. They were trafficked to El Salvador. 75% of them did not have criminal records. 100% of them had the right to due process, and that was violated. And I have had conversations with people that have said, one of them said, well, he had a face tattoo. He's probably in a gang, so ship him to El Salvador. And these are not actions. They did not ship them to El Salvador, send these people to El Salvador. They didn't fly the plane, but they've endorsed the behavior of other people.
They did.
What I mean is, the person I'm talking to, they weren't the pilots or the ICE agents or the Trump administration. They're just people that are supporting it. And to me, that's where it doesn't affect me personally, in the sense of, it's not my family member that was sent there, but it hurts me, my soul, at such a visceral level that it happened, A, and then B, people that look like me endorse it. And that's where I don't have any generous interpretation. My generous interpretation is, what the fuck are you thinking? That this violation of due process, like I wrote about constitutional karma, is like the first people that will start complaining about lack of due process are those people that were like just gave it away for people that they disagree with.
But okay, several things. First, you said they didn't do it. Yes, they did, by complicity. Complicity is as guilty as the person that actually executed.
Fair enough.
The administration, the top leaders in the administration, they didn't do it personally neither. They sent the order. So yes,
Yeah.
of course they're responsible. So it's a matter of who is responsible for the violation of human rights, and yes, it affects you. Because even though you don't know these people, in my case, for instance, they are my community.
Right, exactly.
They are my community. And therefore, they're your community as well, in some way or the other.
Yeah.
But also, for me, it's about human rights. Somebody violates human rights. It hasn't violated mine, but I'm a human. I have rights. It violates everybody's human rights.
Right.
So it's a matter of defending. I'm acting against an aggression.
Right.
But
so
it's different.
Okay.
Not being open. I mean, I can say like, okay, I really want to understand why so many people, and I'm really curious, why?
Right.
When it seems so obvious, why
Right.
so many people still support that?
Right. So I'll give you another example. So I think I hear what you're saying here is, there's a most generous interpretation, like little, let's say like a line over there. And if it involves human rights, I don't have much grace for that. Like, I don't fucking care what your reason is for supporting the violation of human rights. I don't care if you read it in the Bible or you whatever. Like, I don't care. It's wrong. I don't have any sort of moral relativism about that. What involves policy, way more grace. Like, there's a lot of people freaking out, like the Department of Education being canceled. And that's its own debate, whether that's a good thing or bad thing or whatever. And people got laid off. Federal employees got let go and everything. But I'm much more open to being like, okay, well, explain to me why you think that's a good idea. Because I might learn something in that process. And it's similar to what Ryan said about his conversation with his uncle. He was trying to learn about certain things like Citizens United or gun ownership that were kind of policy related. And I think we should have lots of porous back and forth with policy. But when it comes to humans and their dignity, that's to me where I don't want to extend most generous interpretation. I want to fight.
Yeah, but it's funny because for me, everything political is personal, and everything personal is also political. For me, policies affect at a massive level. I mean, affect all of us. And
right.
So it's personal for me, as personal as mass deportations and other things. Somebody's losing. That's the point. Is like, who is exerting their power over other human beings and violating their rights?
Yes.
They do it when they deport innocent people. They do it when they laid off a lot of people, and they do it when they cancel policies that, interesting enough, only hurt the most vulnerable people.
Well, it depends but that's why I'm talking about most generous interpretation of, say, a policy change is, for me, I don't equate the size of a government program to this equivalency of a level of compassion. That many acts of compassion are done without government programs, or government agencies or administrations. I'm not saying we should get rid of all of them, but my point is the pain is different. The pain is different. Someone getting laid off from the government, and that sucks, but that's different than someone being pulled off the street. Like the person that was here is a legal resident student who was pulled off the street without legal representation, and because of her pro-Palestinian views. Like, to me, I can't it's a matter of
Yeah.
this is a matter of things being relative related to the level of pain and harm being done.
Yeah, to you. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
to me, that's what I'm saying though. So I'm only speaking from, I'm not telling anybody else how to,
Yeah.
I'm
It's
just,
not like policy
you're helping me
is
see there's nuance here for me between why do I feel so like angry about people being hurt when it involves like the queer community or immigrants or something. And, there's a government cut, they lay some people off from the government. I'm like, well, that kind of sucks, but I'm not angry about it,
yeah,
So,
because there's some things matters to you more than others, and you
yeah,
have
right, right.
different values and standards. The point is that everybody, for every policy that is published, somebody's hurt, like deeply, deeply hurt, and maybe their life ruined. And so understanding that everybody somehow, usually not everybody, but the most vulnerable people, the
Hmm.
historically marginalized and discriminated and oppressed people are the ones that always the one that are the victims of this kind of power abuse. And so I'm against all that for the sake that, power abuse is power
Hmm.
abuse, no matter where it comes from. And it's normal that we feel differently to different things. We cannot feel the same to everything.
Right.
Our system will not sustain it.
Right, but we're doing it right here on the fly. Like I don't agree with that part of what you're saying, but I can definitely extend most generous interpretation of why you feel that way on the matter of like, what we're talking about. So you're helping me see it. So
You need
anyway,
to be a monk, a Buddhist monk, to actually, and like a really good one, to actually provide a generous interpretation to everything and everyone all the time.
yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't.
I'm not trying. That's my point, though. I'm not trying to. I don't want to for certain things.
I know, that's what you said. It's like I'm not
Yeah.
going to try, and I guess that's okay. The point is that you will do yourself a disfavor if you don't make it a practice with as many people as possible. Doesn't have
Right.
to be everyone, but make as many people as possible, including yourself, as Ryan was saying,
Right.
because
Right.
that's a skill that we need to
Right.
develop if we want to evolve.
And that's why, as a swam, I'm much more open to extending most generous interpretation to people that don't look like me. Um, and right now, I'm okay with that. And it doesn't mean that I'm like I want to be Mr. Aggressive and somebody's wearing a red hat. I want to just yell at it. I'm not talking about being immature or I'm not talking about being just another monkey in the tree throwing shit. Like I don't want that role either.
We have
Anyway,
already
what
many.
else did you take from the conversation? And you asked some really good questions to him, by the way. So
Well, there is something. Let me check my notes. Um, well, I think I mentioned two of them, but there is a third one that I just want. If we close here, I just want to close
mhm.
that one. That was the first thing that Ryan said. When he was talking about his background, and he said, I was not in, I was at the beginning, I was not in the impact world. I was not, my mission was not about making an impact or anything like that. But I went to college and all that to become and work as a counselor for imprisoned kids that were
Mhm.
in jail. That is impact. That is
Yes, right.
impact. That is social change in practice.
Right.
And my reflection to that is that we all, and we have said, you and me many times, we all have a calling that reveals to us very early in life, even if we don't listen to it, even if we
Hmm.
don't follow it or answer it, but it's there. And if we look back, it's like, what are the things that I care about, that I were passionate about, that were intolerant for me, that, that things that couldn't stand or things that I will always fight for, even if my job, my current life doesn't look like that. you have signs all your life. Your soul is sending you signs of this is your calling, this is what you're supposed to do. And some of us find it later and decided that, oh, this is what I'm here for. Some of us find
Hmm.
it like really early. I think I listened to it really early in my life, and I've been very consequent
Yeah,
with my callings.
right.
But it doesn't matter. The point is that we all have one. And if we pay attention to those signs instead of saying like things like, oh no, I just did something else. Now I'm doing what I want. Pay attention to what you were doing and the way you were doing and how satisfied you were while doing it, because that is a sign.
Yeah, very good. Well, we'll wrap the second show. Thank you to everyone watching and listening. A couple of things to wrap here is in the show notes, you'll see a link to our landing page for the Massive Change Show, and there's a form there where you can nominate or suggest someone be a guest. Please do that. Ryan was an awesome guest, a great example of a really rich conversation. And as far as who we're looking for, if you want to reciprocate this awesome content, who we're looking to work with are social impact leaders, with Virginia providing executive coaching and leadership development for their teams. And I work with them on their brand, whether that's a solo system shaker or an organization full of system shakers, to build their brand around the good trouble that they are getting in the world. So until the next show, thank you for listening. Please like, share, comment, and we'll see you next time.